my way through what I was going to show you. It was mostly just a picture of the U.S. Congress, but I'm sure it either brings warm feelings or feelings of horror to your mind if you're thinking about what's going on Capitol Hill right now. So as you just heard, I've spent the last 15 years, 13 to 15 years on and off, working in D.C. with Congress, building knowledge support systems for the House and Senate. I came out of academia. I was in California at Stanford for a number of years when I was actually asked to come to D.C. in the late 90s to put some convening infrastructure inside so that Congress could talk more effectively about the changes we were seeing in the world. And I'll get into this further, but I have to realize with college students today, a lot of you were tiny when the Cold War ended, which was in 1991 when the Soviet Union disappeared. And so what I wanted to start out with was telling you my most interesting experience with the state of Pennsylvania while I worked on Capitol Hill. When I came to D.C. from California, I didn't know what to expect. I certainly didn't think that I would find the most progressive agency in the U.S. government working on foreign policy would be the U.S. Army. And I'd like to ask first, do you have any veterans in here? Yay, thank you. I'd really love for you to contribute and give your perspective on what I'm about to say, because I have many, many friends deployed right now, and I get a lot of my best advice and insight from them who are dealing with what I'm just perceiving from far away. So I was embraced thoroughly by the Army. I went through the Air Command and Staff program at the Air Force. I did lots of work with all the branches of the military, and the reason was that because they were the most capable human resource and the best funded agency we have in the country, able to respond rapidly, they've been used as sort of multitaskers for all kinds of U.S. foreign policy. And we haven't really caught up yet on the civilian elected leadership side. We haven't really had a conversation about what is the division of labor in today's world? What is the usefulness of force? Does it work anymore? If the Cold War ended in 1991, why are we still basically funding a national security infrastructure that's preparing us more for defeating Napoleon than capturing or preventing the future bin Laden? And we can get into what you can do about that as citizens and certainly as residents in this state. So when I was sitting on Capitol Hill in 2003, I got a call from Carlisle, Pennsylvania, right down the road. It's the Army War College. I had a lot of friends there who had been deployed and coming back from these messy, chaotic missions of the 90s. And I got to know them by going to conferences and talking to a lot of them and bringing a lot of them to Capitol Hill, because my job on the Hill was to search out and find these new voices who are implementing U.S. policy on the ground. A lot of them were like the JAGs, who are setting up criminal justice systems in Bosnia, or the Navy folks who are putting together an AIDS prevention program in Africa. Like I said, they were the sort of one-stop shopping for a lot of policy, which is just to say the military is capable, it has incredible logistics, throw them at it. And let me just give you a list of what this messy world has been called since I've been involved in foreign policy, national security in D.C. In the late 1990s, these missions were called military missions other than war, MOVOC, horrible acronym. Then it became asymmetric warfare, irregular warfare, peacekeeping, stability operations, peace enforcement, fourth generation warfare, phase 4 warfare, humanitarian intervention, civilian protection, mass atrocity response, counterinsurgency, complex contingency operation, and just last week I heard someone call it well-armed social work. So what are we about in the world? What are we using our military for? So the first thing I said to my friend, this officer, who was calling me as a friend, not as a uniformed professional, and he said, we're about to get shut down, we're about to get eliminated in the next discussion of the budget cycle. Keep in mind, we were already in Afghanistan for 2 years at that point. We're about to invade Iraq. And here was the institutional memory of the U.S. government and the Army, who captured all the lessons learned of peacekeeping, of these messy, chaotic situations we've been in for the last decade. And I couldn't believe it. I'm like, I can understand if you were Amnesty International or International Crisis Group, but you're the Army. How come nobody knows about this? How could this possibly be happening? And he said, well, nobody really knows about us. This is sort of an embarrassing brass in the military don't know what to call this. There's a huge allergic reaction to anything that looks like counterinsurgency. This is slowly changing today. They said, yeah, we're about to get wiped out. And so I had to sit down, sitting in the Rayburn building on the Hill, and think, okay, who cares about peace issues and lives in Pennsylvania? And later that day, I found myself calling the Quakers to lobby for the Army. And if anybody here who might be a Quaker, no, they're pacifists. But they have some of the most sophisticated framing and knowledge about what's going on in the world. And although they might be pacifists, they always come in. And I remember when I worked on the Hill, even if you agreed with them or didn't agree with them, and I'm not a pacifist, he knew what where they were gonna stand, take a principled stand, and he'd be really good at information. So, the U.S. Congress. So one of the things that I found is that in the last 15 years, you can find amazingly different and diverse set of collaborators to work on U.S. security and the process of reframing it. And what I hope to do is go through some of the impressions I've had and still from working up on the Hill and talking to a lot of people in politics. So we're sitting at this intersection where national security is also a big political issue, and we'll see out the gate very soon. We have already actually in the presidential election. One of the most important things I think people can do who are not sitting in D.C., who are out around the country and who are going to be listening to the debates, is to create political space for candidates and elected leaders to actually talk about who we are and where we're going in the world. Because we really don't have a clear sense of that right now. We have a lot of stuff we've thrown on the wall. It's not really working. The use of force is not something that's bringing many results. You can see that in Afghanistan. Yet we're still, we still interpret power as this sort of idea of coercion, of mass on mass, of maneuver warfare, and it's just not working for us. This is why I think you see a lot of military people coming back in the government who use their skills as American citizens as much as they did, their rifle range skills, because what we've been needing in all of these places in the 90s and now as well is people who know how to stitch together societies, who can convene, who can set up town councils, who can rebuild central banks, who can do everything from A to Z. And we just hit, does anybody know that my tech personally just hit? Let's try this. Okay, great. So here's just a little reminder of what was going on in those years. In 1991, post-Iraq War was sort of a made-to-order ideal situation left over from the Cold War, where you had an army advancing across the border, wiped it out in a number of hours, and nothing ever looked the same after that. And in some ways, my military friends that I talked to, they really learned the wrong lessons from that. That was the Colin Powell doctrine, which was the use of massive force and only going in if you're going to win, only going if you know you're going to have an outcome. Everything after that, Somalia in 1993, if people remember, we lost 1,800 Rangers. It was a humanitarian mission that turned into a search and destroy mission. While we were over there, there was no clear discussion about it. The United Nations was involved. The Americans were there. Did you see Black Hawk Down? I actually thought that was a really good movie. I think it depicted it quite well, the confusion and the wrong set of tools that we had. Everybody from the tactical level, the soldiers fighting, to the people who were supposed to be controlling strategy back in headquarters didn't really have a clear sense, no unity of mission, no unity of outcome. Everything after that, you remember sort of Haiti was supporting a government. We had gunboats sitting off the coast of Haiti, and what they needed was a criminal justice system and standing back a government. So you had all these people in the U.S. government multitasking, and you had these pods of amazing skills developing completely outside the boundaries of the missions of an agency like the Department of Justice and at DOD, especially the Defense Department, State Department, Census Bureau. They were pulling talent from everywhere, and we're still in the midst of this confusion right now in D.C. By the way, the shakedown of it, I think, is going to take another decade to figure out new roles and missions, new division of labor. Honduras was a hurricane. Bosnia, Kosovo, this was peacekeeping missions. Timor was setting back up a government. Pakistan was earthquake response, and the United States' image and reputation in that part of the world went way up immeasurably tsunami, and then again, Afghanistan and Iraq, which are ongoing. I think just to add here is one of the most important things we can do as citizens is make sure that when our fellow citizens who've been deployed or veterans start coming back, is to bring them into conversations about what they're involved with and what that means. Not everybody's going to want to have that conversation, but they really could tell an amazing story of change. And the book that was mentioned, A Woman's Guide to Talking About War and Peace, I wrote it for women candidates, but it's actually a civil-military dialogue guide. And so there's some really good partnership ideas. Like if you have a peace studies program and a ROTC program on campus, get them together to do stuff. I've taught peace studies, and I taught at West Point. And I can guarantee you the curriculums look very much the same in terms of the long-term strategy and the strategy of change. So creating political space for candidates and elected leaders to talk about who we are and where we're going as a country. In sort of political science speak, this is called grand strategy. Does anybody here take political science? Have you gotten to grand strategy yet? Well, in a movie, it's called a plot. In individual life, it's called your destiny. It's sort of the interactive option. It's where you're going. It's the happy ending. And our challenge today is still to recognize these long-ignored security threats that we face and recalibrate our understanding of what it takes to be secure in today's world, and then align our national priorities with those changes. That's not going to happen without a lot of input from American citizens, because in my view, Washington, D.C. is really in a siege mentality. It just hates change. There's a lot of very powerful and lucrative interests that have captured the status quo. And there's a lot of, humans just don't like change. You can call it the military-industrial complex if you want. You can call it whatever. What we lack are new ideas, innovation, risk-taking, and I think courageous leadership. I'm not sure that's going to happen in our institutions of government, but I do have a lot more confidence just in people who have common sense, who aren't sitting there and playing in the same high-stakes atmosphere as DC or Congress. So how do we do this? There's things happening here at home, in states and districts, in Pennsylvania, around the country. The things that I think are going to be most impactful going into the future on reframing security don't have to happen in Washington, D.C. Excuse me, but I'm going to give you the bad news first. What happened? So this is a story you may have heard bits and pieces of. It's coming out a little bit more today. I was actually asked to come to D.C. by a group of members of Congress. One was my best friend from Portland, Oregon, and she was there during what I like to call the lobotomy of Congress. It was in the last conservative ascendance in the mid-90s. One of the first things that the new speaker did was wipe out the informal sector of Congress, the institutional memory, the informal staff. This was 120 scientists that were dedicated to the institution, not to parties, not to personal staffs, and not to partisan committee staffs. In a sense, if you look at anthropology, these relationships that happen underneath the radar screen, they're a really important fabric that stitch together the institution, that carry on. For example, reintroduction of bills, because every bill dies in every Congress. What we've lost so much problems. So that's a good thing. I call them sort of think tank, civilian agency, Democrats, and what I call now evidence-based Republicans. I don't know if Michelle Bachmann drops out of the race. We might have actually an evidence-based GOP field for the presidential race, which would be great. When they start correcting each other, actually, you know it's gotten pretty bad. We have to redefine our strength from a notion of power over to one of power with. And today our strength has to be measured by our credibility and our willingness to engage over the long term. It has to be about how other people around the world see us acting here at home. Are we even making investments in our own credibility? Are we becoming more resilient and adaptive and innovative? Are our people healthy and educated? Can we get places? These are these conclusions that are in this Mr. Y article written by 2 military officers. And the other thing they point out is that our lack of investment in domestic strength will impact our ability to influence outcomes, which is the true test of power. It's the ability to actually influence change to your preferences. And really the credible response to distributed threats is resilience. And you can look at everything from Katrina in 2005 to the I-35 bridge falling in the Mississippi River to some other sort of disasters. The highway system driving up here today was pretty bad. It does not look good. And when you have other countries investing in things like high-speed rail and major transportation systems and healthy populations and lots of education, you can really see that they understand fundamentally that the meaning of power has shifted more than we do. And so this is about our own investments in ourselves. So what would tools for credibility look like? Let me just try these out. You have to move away from coercion, that's the military tool, toward persuasion, away from exclusion and toward participation, away from borders and toward networks, away from secrecy and toward transparency, away from reaction and towards resilience. So this is all preventive, much more preventive, it's much more long-term. And so we're in an academic setting here, and I was thinking some of you must take political economy classes. Any political economist teachers in here? One of the things I remember when I took political economy in grad school was this idea of a cartel, which is a government or a ruling group that just serves very narrow interests. I really think you could say that the U.S. Congress has become an information cartel. And the way you get access, or what it serves, is people who either use knowledge as a commodity, meaning it's sold, or as a weapon, meaning it's talking points and you better stick with us, or say what I tell you, we're going to punish you terribly. Tea Party's great at this. So how do we break that down? One of the things I've also noticed is that universities like this, or other knowledge entities, knowledge factories, people who really take pride in generating robust information, aren't present on Capitol Hill in a meaningful way. They have all kinds of wonderful resources, and again, it's distributed knowledge. It's all around the country, but you're also constituents and residents of the state of Pennsylvania. And if you can't compete with money, what you can do is compete with people. What I've found is there's no effective, really effective, competitive constituency for knowledge and policy making. And I think it's getting worse. And you can see this with the scandalous Twitter feeds you see coming out of Capitol Hill. It gets all the attention. These scandalous hearings. They're not about us. They're sensationalized. It's like tabloidization of the government. This can't help any of us, because if there's one thing that's a scarce resource, everybody knows this, it's time. If Congress is holding gotcha hearings on something, they're not talking about lessons of counterinsurgency, I guarantee you, which is about people's lives. It's about our friends and neighbors that we risk. It's about war and peace and people actually possibly getting killed if we don't fix these problems. And I don't think that the tendency of the institution right now is to fix it. And I'll give you some numbers that are a little bit scary. As I said, when I got to the Hill, I was there during a sort of a wipeout of the institutional memory, and it's hundreds of staff who knew a lot, the expertise. Since then, the leadership, the staff are at 87% of their 1979 levels. Committee staff are at 62% of their 1979 levels. They're cutting all of this again because it's so easy to cut what's called overhead. Wipe out Congress. They don't need all of this. I got to tell you, I've been doing an inventory on the Hill with Hill staff for the last 6 months, and even the policy staff now, to cope with the noise coming in from the email, even the policy staff are having just to do constituent service, which is dealing with and writing form letters. They're not doing big picture thinking. They're not doing policy. So there's this huge vacuum opening up. And my sense is this is why I'm doing this inventory of oversight functions that could be redistributed and decentralized, is that is stuff that can happen in states and districts. I'll give you an example of what I did last year. One of the things I noticed last year, 2 years ago, was that military commanders kept coming back to Congress and saying, there's no military solution. We need the State Department to step up. We need diplomats. Why are we having to do all of the what's called soft security stuff? Why are we having to do all the negotiations, setting up the town councils, rebuilding the School of Education, manning the ministries, whatever? And one of the things I found after looking at what Congress was hearing is there were 40 hearings in 2009 alone on Afghanistan. Every single one of them, you had somebody saying, we need more non-military help, we need humanitarian stuff, we need education, health, welfare stuff. So I set up a hub called the Afghanistan Congressional Communications Hub, which is just one-stop shopping for basic information around. If you'll please give them back to me, because this might be interesting for you to look at. This is what I'm talking about. Really basic information about super important stuff. Just one pages on what the police, what's the kind of art, what did Karzai just say when he came to D.C. Hillary Clinton? I mean, what about the education system? So members of Congress actually have something real to say. They don't. Nobody's doing this up on the Hill. You think the committees do this? They should. They don't do system-wide knowledge support on the Hill. So this is that kind of distributed function. If you would just like maybe pass them back up here. If you want them, I'll give you the website. You can go get all you want. But I don't have a printer right now. So this one-pagers twice a week. I distribute them through my personal networks, and I know a lot of people all over the place working on national security. This is where it went in a month. It went around the world in a month. I was getting notes from commanders saying, oh, thank you, I needed just a one-pager on Helmand Province. I needed a one-pager on air transport system, on borders, on really basic things. Again, I was down talking to Holbrook's team, saying, come on, you guys, you should be doing this. And the thing is there's real problem with information boarding between the executive branch, that's the federal agencies, really full of smart people, and the president. They do not share with the Congress. It's a very adversarial relationship, very antagonistic, because they all are playing gotcha with each other all the time. So how can we, smart people sitting out around the country, people who have amazing on-the-ground experience, fill in those gaps? It's not hard to find them out. I think it's getting easier because there's been huge transparency changes in Congress. Rules passed. A lot of stuff has to be available to the public now that wasn't even a year ago. So this went all over the world, and it was up and running. It's still online. You can Google Afghanistan Congressional Communications Hub. But Congress looks like this. There's a formal, this is what you see on TV. It's the committees, it's the leadership, it's the people with the gavel, it's the stuff on C-SPAN. But there's whole other sectors of Congress. There's the semi-formal sector, that's caucuses and working groups. It's members, humans are just interesting. They're very tribal, and they associate with people not really based on issues, but on social networks. I mean, it's a big marble sandbox, Congress is. And our task is to use this amazing kind of social network knowledge, new media, to pull it apart and figure out, okay, we need a champion on the humanitarian side of engagement in Afghanistan. Who is your member of Congress, Mr. Pitts? How can we get him to be a champion in the realm that he works in? Let me just show you something else. This is really geeky, and I apologize ahead of time, but it's fascinating if you're interested in distributed information. I did this cross-section of Congress on communication nodes. All of these things we're talking about Afghanistan in Congress. All of these things. Or they were venues to talk about Afghanistan. A lot of them didn't do anything. Some of these were really surprising because I went through and I either talked to the staff or went and looked at websites. Now notice too, if you go into house.gov, there's a lot of these sort of caucus things, and they don't have anything updated since 2009. That's another thing you can do for interested members who care about these big picture issues, is give them updated, reliable, credible information for their websites. It's content provision. It's not the architecture. It's creating a relationship and then helping them be an advocate or a global champion. And there's not very many of them because there's not a lot of political payoff in being that voice on the Hill. And it's vital for us in our security that we start to see ourselves in context. So, what are the functions of the whole oversight process that can be redistributed to states and districts? So, one of them is subject matter expertise. You can do an inventory of military. There's people here probably know stuff you would never realize. We're also maybe comfortable in a political environment. It's not a big deal for them. Real-time knowledge support is another one. Hearings are now being broadcast live. I know a group of climate scientists who are doing live support in the Commerce Committee doing fact check because climate change has become basically a religious litmus test issue. It's becoming highly politicized where there's been really strong feelings that just shut out the other side. So they have a team of people sitting there able to respond immediately, real time, local social, mobile. That's our future. And it's going to be the future of Congress, too, if we want this public interest to be represented. So here's the other one. This is the informal sector and then the personal interest segment. You have 100, I mean, at this point you probably have over 100 members of Congress that have gone to Afghanistan. I can guarantee you they're hearing what I'm just telling you is if they talk to their guardian, they'll say, this has no military solution. What's your plan? So, all of that, and I really fear this conversation's going to end in a really unsatisfactory way because everybody's just so anxious to make it go away. Working groups, all kinds of stuff. And you remember can start a working group. So here's just some ideas, but I did a little research on, you're a member of Congress here, so you have the Army War College. Here's a project for you. I'm going to talk to the Army War College tomorrow because my friends at the Peacekeeping Stability Operations Institute told me again 2 months ago that they're threatened with elimination. Here, 10 years into Afghanistan, where we're still learning all of these non-traditional lessons, they're going to wipe out the institution in the Army that's collecting all these lessons. So how do we create standing support systems for that entity? One of the biggest problems for the military, and they've been their own worst enemy at this, is that I think they've allowed defense contractors or commercial interests to be their advocates on policy. And it's just not in Lockheed Martin's interest to talk about peacekeeping. Just to face it, there's not a lot of money. Anything that's human resource intensive is not going to have the purchased access to Congress. For every one of me on Capitol Hill, there's 150 people from Boeing and Grumman and Northrop and all these other places making billions and billions of dollars on the status quo. One of the things that needs to happen locally, I think too, what you might call sustainable security task forces, where you get economists at universities talking to retired military. There's a lot of officers everywhere, or whoever, who can provide context and create real, localized economic conversion plans from Cold War industry to modern nation. We did this in the 80s a little bit. There's just a few studies out there. One for when they cut the F-35 or 2 years ago, the F-22, I'm sorry. One of the ways they were able to do that was they did a whole conversion plan and they actually substituted the jobs with another fighter plane, which I would argue we also don't need the Joint Strike Fighter, but at least they had a real conversation and some real research going into it. I'm really interested to see how you could redistribute a lot of that money, the federal money, into these credibility investments. That would be health, education, transportation. A lot of the money at the local level, like police forces, a lot of that money trickles down. So the more we keep fighting Napoleon and looking backward, the less actual safety we're going to have in our own communities. And I don't believe in guns versus butter trade-offs, and I don't believe in the arguments of, well, we're building in Afghanistan so we can't. Well, why are we building it there? I mean, I understand the appeal of that. I don't think we should be withdrawing precipitously from any place like Afghanistan or Iraq, frankly. We can have an argument about that if you want. But I do think it's really important that we have a really hard conversation about trade-offs, and that can only be helped if we have an ends versus means discussion. Meaning this is where we want to go in the world. It's about investing in our own credibility so we'll have persuasive influence. We're really not doing that right now. And one of the reasons is because we're still so stuck in the past. So I'd be happy to have a conversation now if any of these sound interesting to you. What could you do for Mr. Pitts as a student here? He's on the Helsinki Commission in Congress. This is all on his website. He's a Vietnam veteran. He's on the Energy and Commerce Committee, which is very powerful on climate issues. He's on the China Commission. He's on the Republican Study Committee. He does very little on foreign policy because I get their newsletter. They don't do much at all. He's on the Electronic Warfare Working Group. That's his working group. He's a missionary, an educator. He was on the International Relations So, but, I mean, I think one of the reasons why is because if there's not, I mean, politics is, it's about assessing risk. And if there's not a lot of payoff for being a champion of these really important global common goods, much less American common goods, things that don't have big, powerful moneyed interests behind them, or loud, angry people in your district, then you're not going to respond to it. It's triage. It's not like it's bad intentions. It's just you're trying to make the noise go away. As a former Hill staff, I can tell you, you just want that level of noise to come down. And you love people who are actually come in and say, what can I do for you to make it easy for you to say yes to this? And then you do that for them. So there's those. And the other thing I've noticed is after that massacre in Tucson, the whole idea of meeting and convening in public changed. So you're not going to have members of Congress standing in the Safeway parking lot anymore. You're not going to have town halls. Everybody hates town halls now because they got really thuggy in 2009 during the healthcare debate with the Tea Party with us. And then nobody wants to do it anymore because now everybody's showing up with flip cams and trying to put something awful on YouTube. So the thing that needs to be invented, again, by citizens who care, who have talent at convening, is new convening mechanisms. Figuring out what's a comfortable, safe way for you to meet with powerful people. Members are doing this all the time. You can go on their website and say, I didn't look at Mr. Pitts, but they would love to, I'm sure, try out new menus of meeting with you. Having them lead these kind of conferences. Having their staff. I guarantee they probably don't know, creating rosters of willing, helpful, smart people for them. And this isn't a partisan issue, and they would love to have people who are also voters and